Who will rid me of this meddlesome priest? Hey everybody, welcome to the Modscast. Thinking about some Comey in his testimony the other day said that Trump's request to him about, I hope you can find a way to let this thing go. He invoked an image. He said it felt like, who will rid me of this meddlesome priest or troublesome priest, which was some historical context for that. And the guy asking the questions, I think it was Warner from Virginia. I can't remember, recognized it. Okay. But I was thinking about it, and it's a pretty illuminating example. So I'm going to give you a little historical context for the example of what he used, and then show you why it's an indicator of what's really wrong with the whole system right now. Without getting into the Trump thing or any of that, I could try to tell you I'm looking from up above and trying to see what the trends are. And what these things suggest. So Henry II was King of England from 1154 to 1189. He inherited a pretty messed up situation. His mom and his uncle had been fighting for the throne. So he was trying to unify the kingdom. A very dynamic individual, Henry, very strong individual. Early in his career, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Theobald, referred to him, this young guy, Thomas à Becket, who was an up-and-comer, a merchant's son from London. And he became the chancellor for Henry. And they two became very, very good friends, despite a pretty significant age difference. But both men of vision, of personality, colorful characters, and this idea of trying to unify and stabilize a kingdom that had been torn up. Time goes on. Some funny anecdotes about the two of them. And Thomas is known for liking very nice things. And having fancy dinners and, bigwigs and celebrities and stuff, right? So at any rate, eventually Theobald, the Archbishop of Canterbury, dies, and there needs to be a new one appointed. And Henry decides that what he wants is to appoint his best friend, Thomas à Becket, to be the Archbishop of Canterbury, because one of the conflicts at the time, for the history, those of you who don't know, was the debate between whose laws had precedence, laws of the church or the laws of the crown, of the king, right? And the king was believed to be divine right, appointed by God. But there were questions of land ownership, who could be tried. The church had trials in its own courts, and the king had his trials, and there were disputes about power and authority, and most of it, as you imagine, has to do with positions of power, distribution of land, revenues from land, that kind of thing. So at any rate, Henry decided, well, if my best friend is the Archbishop of Canterbury, then we'll be able to work out a lot of these problems, in theory. Becket apparently at the time warned him, this will be the ruin of our friendship if you do this. But at any rate, Henry goes ahead and does it, and very soon Becket starts to cause problems because he takes his job very seriously, and he defends the rights of the church, the laws of the church, against the laws of the throne, which doesn't make Henry happy. Things go from bad to worse. They have a major falling out, to the extent where Becket, fearing for his safety, flees England to France and sort of leads this underground revolution in exile against the people of the church who are still there. He's obviously titularly still the Archbishop of Canterbury, and Henry tries to run things. He's angry, and at any rate, the Pope ends up having to mediate between the two of them, and they are reconciled. And Becket's chroniclers and stuff talk about this meeting, and it appears to have been a genuine reconciliation between two old friends, both very, very great men. And by great, I just mean powerful egos, men of consequence, who stand upon what they believe in very firmly, and have, the kind of thing you get when you get two really strong people. So despite their friendship, these principles get in the way, and they have a difficult time working that out. So Becket, after their reconciliation, Becket goes back to England. Henry's still in France, and Becket starts causing trouble again, and word comes to Henry that this is happening. And in a rage, probably drunken rage, Henry says something to the effect, and this is what I believe Thomas's chronicles say. He said, "Who will rid me of this infernal priest?" or this meddlesome priest, or this troublesome priest, something along those lines. I'll attach some links to some historical articles on that so that you can kind of get the deal. But at any rate, some knights who were there, probably also drinking, take this as a sign that Henry wants someone to solve the problem. And I want to talk because the knights are who I want to compare. So at any rate, they decide to go and try and deal with the Thomas problem. So they hop on a ship that night, cross the channel, go where they find Becket getting ready to say Mass at Canterbury Cathedral. They try to arrest him. He says, I'm not going with you. Then they come to him when he's actually saying the Mass and try to take him, and he refuses. And they end up drawing their swords and killing him in the cathedral. And in front of the people. Subsequently, Henry was mortified, haunted by what had happened. The men who did it, the knights who did it, were shamed and disgraced for the remainder of their days. And Henry ended up doing public penitence. He underwent flogging, public proceeded, and spent a night in the crypt of Thomas, some 4 years, I think, afterwards, to atone for it. And the key thing, the reason, okay, so you have this situation where two great men are warring, and then four little men who want to be great men are listening, and they don't ask what they're supposed to be doing. They just do what they think will get them advancement and favor. They decide that the king wants to get rid of the problem. Anybody who gets rid of this problem for him will be advanced. Yeah. They didn't understand what they were dealing with. Now, I'm not going to suggest that Trump is a great man. That isn't the point. What I want to look at is the little men. And these knights are essentially like the bureaucrats of today, and so many people who don't stand on principle. Yeah. So Comey makes this comparison. Well, it felt like that. Okay, well, let's remember, first of all, that the knights in that example were wrong. They interpreted what was said to them incorrectly, and they acted on it. Okay. And then you have a situation where Comey interpreted what he said and didn't, he admits in the hearings, right? Oh, well, this is what I understood. Okay. Now, he didn't act on it. In fact, he's trying to curry favor by saying that he wouldn't have acted on it. But what he did do, and this is worse with you don't expect the knights in a medieval monarchy to say, hey, Your Majesty, what exactly are you asking us to do? Do you want us to go kill him? Or do you want us to arrest him? Or what is it? How can we do this? And yet with Comey, he claims that, well, we weren't going to do it. And I guess I sort of, a stronger person might have done it. Well, yeah, a stronger person would have said, you know what, Mr. President, if you're asking me to drop this, understand that I can't do that. Now, we know that legally Trump had every right to say, if he wants, is perfectly within his legal bounds to say, drop this case. He can do that. And he didn't do that. Now, had he done that, it would have been incumbent upon Comey, if he's the man of principle and integrity that he says he is, to say, nope, you'll have to find someone else to do that. I'm resigning my post. Which actually people did in the Nixon administration, right? Now, what I want to get at is that this tendency to want to advance yourself one way or the other, rather than to keep your job or, advance yourself. Comey, if he's the man of principle that he claims and that everyone says, if he thought that, why wouldn't he say, sir, this conversation is inappropriate? Well, and everyone's attitude is, well, okay, well, that's, your boss telling you that. Okay, well, here's the deal, and this is our problem. Your boss is not a king. Your boss, even the president, cannot execute you, have you killed, because you disagreed. Okay, then the argument, well, but he's afraid for his job. Okay, if you're going to compromise your principles in order to keep your job, that's not leadership. The men who went and killed Beckett, who interpreted that thing, interpreted it quickly in order and interpreted all within context of how they could advance their own careers. They weren't thinking outside of themselves. They weren't recognizing this is a conflict between two very old friends who are very powerful people and involved in a very powerful struggle, the question of whether the church or the crown has authority, that this thing is much deeper than we are. What they said was, the king wants something done. If we do it, we'll get good stuff out of it. And they acted. Now, Comey interprets, and this is true, Comey interprets it, this is what I thought was said. So I thought so much that I wrote it all down. Okay, so why didn't you say anything at the time? If you're a person of principle, you would have. Okay, but then he would have lost his job. Oh, but that doesn't wash because he's a DC insider. Okay, the guy's got $1 million book deals waiting to be written, consulting jobs, media jobs, whatever, right? I mean, we all know that. Once you're in there. So unless he wanted the power, wanted to keep the position, then why would he not stand up for that principle? If it's really that important. And he says, well, stronger men would have did. Okay, fair enough then. Let's get a stronger person in there. This is half our problem. We're so cynical of being able to stand up for what's right. And look, the reason I want to get at this is not to get involved in the Trump Comey issue, all that stuff, but to look at how we are as people and how afraid people are to stand up for what's right because they're afraid of losing their jobs. And all that is normal. But what do you expect from a society where everyone is just going to continue to compromise to authority because they're afraid? If your boss tells you you got to fire this guy and you know that the person is innocent or shouldn't be fired, you also know that they have very serious issues going on at home and stuff with finances, that they can't afford the instability of having to look for a job right now. But you know, most importantly, that they don't deserve to be fired. And you know that the reason for firing them is bogus. So they'll tell you we don't have the resources, but you know the numbers don't add up, that the money that they're going to take from this person's salary is going to go someplace that isn't needed or to someone else. Now, you're going to risk your own job and stand up for what's right or not. This is the challenge we all face every day, okay? And it's difficult. I won't deny it. I'm not saying that it's easy because we have to balance that thing. But when in our highest levels of government, at our most important positions, where we need great people, leaders, okay, who will stand on principle and not be afraid, and show the rest of the population that that's what we try to do. That's what we do. It's a problem when you're willing to compromise principles and in order to, to keep power, to keep your job. Those are small people, like those knights who went and killed Beckett. They're seeking to preserve themselves or their own agenda, and they're not seeing the larger picture. They're not standing upon a principle. That is to say, this law is bigger than you or I, Mr. President. You're not allowed to talk to me about that, and I certainly can't do that. Now, you can order me to do it, but I'm not going to do it. You should understand that I'll resign before I do that, and you can find someone who will do it. That is principle. That's leadership. But most of the bureaucracy now is people who don't want to rock the boat. They're afraid to rock the boat. The vast majority of people are. And like I said, it doesn't make them bad people. It's normal. But fear is rampant. It's our greatest enemy. The internet information multiplies fear. So people are afraid. And when they're afraid, you compromise those things. And we live in an age that says, well, what's the point of standing on principle? Are you willing to, lose your job for a principle? Sure. If it's the right thing, it's the right thing. Now, we live in a society that says that there is no right thing. And morality, well, it's conditional. Power at any price, by any means necessary. You got that group now? By any means necessary? Really? Those are some scary things when you say that. Because it suggests what you're willing to compromise. But what's revealed is little people interpreting things in ways that they want to. And then even worse, claiming some kind of moral high ground. So Comey's able to get up there and say, look, well, I wasn't going to do that because that's not how we work. And I'm very proud of the FBI. Yeah. Well, why didn't you stand up and say it before you were saying it in a public setting and garnering the support? In other words, if you said to if the president asks you to do that and you say, I'm not going to do it to him in private, it doesn't matter if anybody ever even knows that meeting took place. It has nothing to do with the world going, wow, what a noble person you are. It has everything to do with you doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do. And what we have is when you had these great, in the case of Henry and Thomas, you had these great egos, these great men of action and consequence clashing with one another, and two little men thinking, how can I gain from this? And taking matters into their own hands and misinterpreting what was said to them because they were thinking about how they could gain. That's what the problem is. That's what Comey's invocation of that image reveals. Not some sinister plot from Trump, which is a separate issue if you want to talk about it. But his interpretation of it reveals his opportunism and the opportunism of an entire class. No, not even a class of bureaucrats, of an entire society that's thinking primarily about self-preservation and self-promotion and self-advancement rather than what is right. And that, to me, is the problem. So anyway, a little brief history lesson there, and some interesting thoughts on who will rid me of this meddlesome priest. Huh. All right. Remember, it's way more important to do right than it is to be right. Thanks for watching. Cheers.